Urgent message to subscribers. Hey everyone, this channel is still online, but many others are being taken down across YouTube. If that happens here and you want to keep following the reports and revelations, I'll be reactivating my channel on Rumble, under the same name, Geopolitics Update, same colors, same style. Thanks for your continued support. And remember, the revelations aren't held by governments. Since ancient times, beings have always contacted specific groups of people on Earth. Just look at the history of humanity. Ukraine crisis and Russia's advance, the end of the war is near. Welcome to the Geopolitics Update channel. Monday, November 10, 2025. Recent reports confirm that Vladimir Putin maintains a strategic upper hand in the Ukraine conflict, with no ceasefire in sight as Russia seeks more favorable conditions before entering negotiations. According to diplomatic sources, Putin's strategy is to keep Ukraine under sustained pressure, not just for military gain, but to secure symbolic dominance. The Donbas region, long marked by ethnic and political tensions, remains the epicenter of the conflict. Analysts project that pro-Russian areas like Donetsk and Luhansk may be absorbed into Russian control, shifting the local geopolitical balance. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is reportedly facing growing internal pressure, especially after choosing to hold positions in cities like Kupiansk and Krasnoarmysk despite the risk of encirclement. German outlet Bild reported that up to 10,000 Ukrainian troops may be surrounded in those areas. Intelligence intercepts suggest Ukrainian commanders are concerned about the lack of a strategic withdrawal. Putin has allegedly urged Kyiv to accept an honorable surrender of isolated troops, though Ukraine maintains it still controls the contested cities. Tactical assessments describe the situation as critical, with logistical breakdowns and imminent risk of defensive collapse. A Ukrainian diplomat compared the current scenario to the Battle of Bakhmut in 2023, citing a recurring pattern of prolonged resistance, denial, and delayed retreat. Zelensky is said to be reluctant to publicly acknowledge the severity of the situation, fearing a loss of international support. Meanwhile, Russia accuses Ukraine of concealing battlefield realities, prolonging the war at the cost of thousands of lives. The Russian Ministry of Defense claims that Ukrainian positions in Kharkiv are deteriorating rapidly, with the city of Luhansk reportedly close to falling. Encircled Ukrainian troops face worsening conditions, with no viable escape routes. Supply reports indicate shortages of food, winter gear, and cold weather equipment, raising concerns as winter approaches. Russian Commander Lovrik of the 68th Motorized Rifle Division claimed his unit recaptured 25 buildings in a single day, stating the city would soon be fully under Russian control. What once seemed unlikely is becoming the new normal. International media, including European and Russian outlets, have reported on controversial symbols used by some Ukrainian military units, including flags and insignias linked to historical nationalist movements. While largely ignored by mainstream Western press, these claims have been highlighted by independent observers. The historical relationship between Russia and Ukraine is deeply fraught, with events like the Holodomor, the 1930s famine under Stalin that killed millions, still shaping collective memory. The current war is fueled not only by modern geopolitics but by decades of cultural, political, and territorial disputes. Analysts suggest that external powers often exploit internal divisions and historical wounds to destabilize regions. The use of local conflicts to advance broader geopolitical agendas has been a recurring tactic in the 21st century, and remains active today. And that's where the narrative shifts. Alternative analysts argue that the war is part of a broader effort to weaken Russia's resistance to globalist agendas. Since Moscow's break with multilateral blocs in 2012, external pressure on the Kremlin has intensified. Russia's modern history, marked by revolutions and regime changes, is often cited as a warning about the risks of indirect destabilization. Russia's recent history has been marked by a process of institutional and symbolic reconstruction following the upheavals of the 21st century. In strategic circles, it is said that the country has sought to reclaim elements of its historical identity, including the formal recognition of the Romanov dynasty and the renewed emphasis on Orthodox tradition. These moves are interpreted as efforts to reassert national sovereignty in the face of external pressure. Since 2012, the Russian government has increasingly challenged global financial and political structures. Intelligence-sourced financial reports highlight the creation of systems parallel to the Western model. The development of an alternative to the SWIFT network has allowed Russia to mitigate some of the economic sanctions imposed by Western nations. This parallel architecture is seen as a response to rising tensions with multilateral blocs and international financial institutions. That was the moment the board began to expand. In the context of the war in Ukraine, observers note that Western narratives largely portray Moscow as the aggressor. However, alternative analyses point to the complexity of the situation, including allegations of human rights violations by Ukrainian authorities in predominantly ethnic Russian regions like Donetsk and Luhansk. According to diplomatic sources, these tensions may have triggered Russia's military intervention. From this perspective, the war is viewed by some as an indirect clash between competing geopolitical models. Ukraine's alignment with Western alliances turned the country into a flashpoint between divergent strategic interests. Analysts argue that the conflict has been instrumentalized by international actors, prolonging its duration and complexity, and turning the battlefield into a showcase for global agendas. Criticism of Kyiv's handling of the war also extends to the economic front. There are claims that sectors tied to the central administration are profiting from the conflict, while civilians bear the brunt of the violence. This perception fuels skepticism toward the narrative of national liberation. Comparisons with other international interventions, often justified on humanitarian grounds, are frequently used to highlight the ambiguity of the motives involved. The situation in eastern Ukraine, particularly in Donetsk and Luhansk, remains a focal point of tension with direct implications for regional stability and the balance between geopolitical blocs. Ukraine's military position continues to deteriorate. Recent reports indicate that entire units are encircled in strategic areas, facing supply shortages and rising desertion rates. Independent sources claim that Ukrainian soldiers are abandoning their posts to avoid capture or extreme survival conditions. There is growing expectation that the conflict may be nearing a resolution, whether through partial surrender or forced negotiations. The advance of Russian forces and the siege of key cities are pressuring Kyiv to consider diplomatic alternatives before facing total defeat. The likelihood of a settlement favorable to Russia increases as the military balance shifts on the ground. The curtain rises on a new hemispheric theater. International analysts suggest that the end of the war could open the door to strategic realignments in other regions. The Monroe Doctrine, often referenced in political discourse, has returned to the center of debates on hemispheric influence. Observers note that authoritarian-aligned governments in Latin America are facing growing diplomatic and economic pressure, with potential consequences for regional alliances. Political instability in countries like Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua is being closely monitored by global leaders. There is an expectation that shifts in the global geopolitical balance could directly impact external support for these regimes. The collapse of multilateral structures and ideological blocs is also seen as a possibility amid the weakening of their foundational support. And that's where everything converges. Meanwhile, multilateral events like COP30 are facing logistical and diplomatic challenges. The absence of key leaders at critical moments has sparked criticism over the effectiveness of climate negotiations and the relevance of the summit. Public perception has been marked by frustration with the event's organization and costs, especially given the high expectations for tangible outcomes. The war in Ukraine, therefore, remains a catalyst for broader geopolitical transformation. Moscow's posture, combined with Kyiv's reluctance to acknowledge the severity of the situation, continues to prolong the conflict amid mounting fatigue. The convergence of major powers around the containment of globalist structures is seen as a factor that could accelerate the end of hostilities, and pave the way for a new international order. In reports circulating among security councils and tactical analysis platforms, there's a growing perception that the conflict in Ukraine is not merely a war over territory, but a ritual of geopolitical transition. While the world's attention is fixed on maps and missiles, the true vectors of power operate in silence. Parallel financial networks, ministerial algorithms, foundations with diplomatic immunity, and unwritten pacts between blocs that never confront each other directly, but cancel each other out from within. In this context, war is just the surface. Beneath it, the ground pulses with movements that don't show up on conventional radars: secret energy deals, the relocation of strategic assets, and the slow replacement of institutions by automated systems of control. What once seemed like a regional conflict has become a laboratory for global engineering. They're not just redrawing borders. They're redefining the very concept of sovereignty. End of the report, folks. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join the conversation in the comments. If you'd like to support us directly, consider making a donation using the link in the description or the QR code on screen. Your contribution helps us work better, and keeps this project alive and independent. Thank you so much. And see you in the next report. This content is a narrative adaptation based on public topics of global geopolitics. The version presented has been transformed with an original style, drawing on public information, analyses, and opinions, and its sole purpose is to inform and entertain.